Hello everybody, it's Rachel here at Clatty Hands Crafts, and my current project is this junk journal, which is full of lots of vintage looking pages and nice bold colours. I want to be able to fill this up with plenty of interactive pages, some textured journal cards, we want loads of pockets, we want embellishments. We want it to look really tactile and irresistible to the touch. So that is what I am starting with in this video. I'm going to be making a journal card today using this photograph that I have out. So the first thing that I need to do is cut it because we've got a border there. I got this image from Lavender Blue Journals, which is an Etsy shop. I used to be part of the design team for them, but since I haven't been crafting much recently, that is no longer the case. But what we're doing here is just adding some ink to the edges of the photograph to make it look even more worn and aged. So I'll cut some of the time out of the video that I spend doing my inking because I do an awful lot of it in my junk journals. So I have this deckled edge ruler which went missing for many years, and as soon as I bought a new one I managed to find my original one. But anyway, I'm using that to make a nice little border for this photograph. Add in the ink again, and I think I do a mix of vintage photo type colours and then like a really dark brown as well. I tend to use the darker brown when I want a nice contrast. The next thing that I want to do is mount this photograph onto that piece of raggy paper, if you like. I have done that slightly off centre, and I did that on purpose because if you've been watching for a while you will know I am on an ever-present journey to try and reduce how straight and neat all of my junk journals are. They never look very shabby, they always look very straight and very aligned, and I'm trying to get past that, but obviously I want it to look good and pleasant to the eye. It's called shabby chic for a reason, people. So that is the aim that I'm going for. So if you ever wonder why I'm doing things and they look slightly uneven, it's on purpose, I promise you. So now I am finding some little scraps of fabric just to balance out this corner. As you can see, the image itself is actually slightly off centre, and I just thought I'd use this piece of fabric to balance it out slightly, add some weight to the left hand side as well as the right, because her hat and scarf take up most of the right hand top corner, so I'm balancing that out in the bottom left corner. I'm using these glue applicators courtesy of my father. He likes to do modelling for his model railway, and he told me about these little glue applicators that he had, and he had a pack of 12 or something, so he kindly donated some to me. So now we've got that lighter colour on the background. I'm going to contrast that with some packaging paper. This is Amazon packaging, which comes in very handy for us junk journalers, and I'm just scrunching it up because I want some texture in that paper, and I'm going to accentuate that even more with some ink shortly. So I'm just tearing that. Did you know that paper has a grain? So sometimes it will tear easily one way without tearing easily the other way, so just make sure that you're considering that when you come to tear your paper. It can be quite frustrating when you start tearing it and then pieces just kind of come off in random shapes and you're wanting a straighter edge. I'm going to go in with that darker ink again, and I'm going to lightly brush over with I'm just showing you which ink I'm using, even though you can't really see it. I don't know if it's gathered twigs or something like that. It's a dark brown ink, and I am using my applicator and just lightly brushing it so that it catches all of the tops of those scrunches, so that they can be seen even without looking too closely. I inked around the edges of that piece as well, so that it would create a bit more dimension when it is layered on top of something else, because what it does is creates a kind of shadow so that it gives an illusion of distance between that piece and whatever lies behind it. I didn't like that piece that was sticking up past the crease, so I just tore it off and then covered up the evidence with some more ink. And then I used my fingers to mark where I wanted the glue to go, place some glue down on that side of the photograph, and then stuck it down on top, like that. Now that glue, I have watered it down slightly and it is coming out a little bit too runny now. I needed it to be slightly runny so that it would get through the nozzle because it's a really fine tip. so I added water to it, but of course I've added slightly too much. It comes out a little bit too fast and runny, and it creates a wrinkle if you're not careful. So what I've had to do is weigh it down once it was all done, once it was all glued into position, but you'll see that shortly. So this is a piece of lightly tea-stained card, and this is going to be the background of my journal card, and the plainness is going to be great for writing on, so I'm keeping one side of it plain and then using my photograph design on the other side of it. I don't use any specific measurements, I just cut them to whatever size I fancy at the time, as you can see here. I also wanted to have some rounded corners, so I've got this punch that I got off Temu, I think. It has rounded corners, and then on the other side it's got a little notch maker which helps you to make envelopes, and it came with a scoreboard, so I'll have to figure out how to use the whole thing together, because at the moment I've just been using the punch more than anything. So now I've got a nice contrasting background for this little matted piece to lay on, and I inked the edges of it as well, just so that it wouldn't be too starkly white. It was very beige looking, so I decided that it could do with a little flash of colour, so I've used some of the fabric that I used on the front cover of the journal to jazz it up a bit. I did consider using this little piece of card, but it just wasn't quite as punchy as the fabric, so I decided to go with the fabric option. The great thing about woven fabrics like this is that you can just cut a little notch in it with a pair of scissors and then tear it into the strip that you want. I probably could have left some of those little threads hanging down to make it even more interesting, but I didn't on this occasion. Now, what I'm doing here is a little bit of playing around with all of the positions, and this is something that I do with every single piece that I make. You don't always see it when I am filming videos, because I cut a lot of it out, because a lot of it is me just kind of staring at things, and it's not the most engaging kind of video that you could want. But what I'm trying to say is I want you to know that it doesn't always come naturally to me straight away. There's a lot of playing around, there's a lot of experimentation goes on, but it's just not necessarily caught on camera. Eventually I decided that I was going to place this piece underneath the photograph, and it was just going to be peeking out from behind, but then I decided that a little pennant kind of banner edging would make it a bit more interesting to look at, and it wouldn't make it so bright and overpowering. So it kind of took away a little bit of the colour and made it fade more into the background. Another problem with the glue being so wet is that I've got to be careful where I'm placing it on fabrics, because it was just soaking right through. As you can see, as soon as I've smoothed that down there, it just came straight through. So I had to make sure that none of that was going to be visible from the front of that piece of fabric or ribbon, whatever you want to call it at this point. The good thing is that when you're layering like this, you can strategically place things over the top and hide those unsightly glue lines. However, when I decided on the placement, I used plenty of glue, because I need to make sure that everything is really well stuck down, because this is a journal card which is potentially going to be pulled in and out of pockets regularly, so we want to make sure that everything is secured as much as possible. As I said before, that glue is in danger of making everything puckered and rippled, so we need to make sure that that's weighed down with something flat. I think I used a big heavy box that you can't see in shot, but I just weighed it under there for a good 15-20 minutes while I made this little thing. So my next project was to use a scrap, because I saw the shape of it and I thought, well, that just needs to be used straight away. We can make a little pennant, kind of embellishment. I don't know what to call it, but I was inspired by it, so I went with it. This was a case of going with my gut. I just used some of the scraps that were already on my desk, and I just let them lead the way and decide what needed to be done with them. So this was a piece of embossed paper, which again had that deckled edging, and it coordinated with the journal card that I'd been making before. It's not necessarily going to appear in the same place as the journal card, but it just helps the cohesion throughout the journal altogether when you have little hints of the same fabrics used throughout, and some of the same styles as well. So that carries through, and that's just part of how you make it look like a nice coordinated journal. This scrap had been embossed with my embossing machine. It was just a patterned embossing folder that I used, Nothing really themed about it, but it just adds extra interest yet again. And then I did the same technique where I brushed the ink over the top of it to catch the peaks. I am going to have to change the glue that I use because this was just pretty much useless when it came to fabrics. It's alright once you've weighed it down, it does stick, but in the future I'm going to use the normal tacky glue, so it's a bit thicker and it's got a bit more grip to start with, because it wasn't even holding things in place. I found that my thumb was actually stickier than the piece of paper that I'd put the glue on, so it kept lifting off every time I rearranged things. I've got this tiny piece of lace here that I was wanting to put across the top, but I felt that it was a bit too stark of a contrast with it being that kind of vintage white lace. So I was roughing it up to make it look less straight, but then I found another piece of that same fabric that I used on the picture earlier, and I've just cut that down to size. So that was more of a creamy faded colour so that it would blend more, and then of course I've added some ink to the top of it to bring down the contrast a little bit. So between having that there and then the white lace on top, it stops it looking quite so out of place. I do like to try and use every single scrap that I come across. So I always keep little pieces like this, little pieces of fabric, little pieces of lace, little pieces of card and paper, because they can all be used to make clusters, they can all be used to decorate embellishments, they can just all be stuffed in and stuck down and made part of your junk journal. And that's one of the great things about it, it's made of junk. Now, admittedly, I do throw away boring pieces. If they are just little scraps of white copier paper, I will throw them out, because otherwise you're just going to be overwhelmed by them. There's no point in keeping those. And if you have loads of the same kind of thing over and over again, the same papers, then you might want to downsize a little bit. You might just want to pass them to a friend or, sell them online. we buy all sorts of weird stuff, us junk journalers, so don't be surprised if they do sell. I didn't have anywhere specific in mind that I wanted to put this journal card, so I found this packet when I was looking through, and then I went on to look for somewhere to put the little pennant embellishment. And eventually I settled on this page, which was a little flip out page, and I decided to put it centrally. I had toyed with the idea of putting it off to one side, but then I decided I want it right in the middle so that it's a little lift up thing that you can write behind, and then it'll reveal more of the text that you've written. Just makes it fun. I couldn't be bothered with fussing with that horrible glue, so I just stapled it. And then I needed to deal with the back side, which had the bits of staple that can lift up and cut you, as I found out when I was in primary school and nearly fainted because I ran my fingers over some staples. I just picked up this little piece of raggy lace that I had to one side and put that over the staple. Then I was back to using that horrible glue again, but hey ho, we do what we must. And I just applied plenty of it to stick that lace down. Oh, this was a little thing that I did just to make sure that it gripped. I used a tape roller as well. I think it's like glue dots on that roller. And I put that beneath the glue so that it would just have something to grip onto until it dries. I found this little red flower in my embellishments box, and because there's holes in the lace, I wanted to make sure that that staple was well and truly covered. So I inked it to bring down the brightness a little touch. I did actually end up knocking the centre of the flower off, as you can see there. It was just a little adhesive pearl, but I couldn't stick it on because the glue was attached to it. It was no longer wet, so I've just added a tiny blob of glue to stick that back down and use my tweezers to put it in place. I used plenty of glue to stick the flower down to make sure that it anchored all of that lace, because I wasn't convinced that it was going to stick by itself very strongly, so extra glue on the flower just holds that down as well. And there we have it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye.